Hey everybody, Legal Vices here, bringing you our review of day 5 of the Karen Reed murder trial. This summary is going to be long. There was only 3 people on the stand, but it was a crazy day. I wish I'd been able to cover this live. It was absolutely insane. So bear with me as we go through a rather lengthy summary of what happened during day 5. The first person to take the stand was Paul Gallagher, the Canton police lieutenant. Now, on his direct examination, he testified that after John O'Keefe was taken to the hospital, he apparently saw some blood drops, and he decided to use a leaf blower to remove snow from the evidence. He was literally using the snowblower to blow away snow from the evidence. He said he had never processed a scene in the snow. Then he took some pictures. There's some really bad dash cam of him driving through the snow, and he claims that it shows people doing things. All right. But then there's a video of him blowing snow with a leaf blower. He says he's blowing layers of snow to expose blood and a cocktail glass underneath. He kept trying to narrate what was happening while the video was playing. Now I'm doing this, now I'm doing that, and then I'm doing that. And then finally, the judge stepped in and told him to be quiet unless he's being asked a question and not to narrate. Then he does it again. So the judge had to repeatedly tell him to be quiet unless he's being asked a question. And he admits on his direct examination that he didn't see anything other than blood or glass. He didn't observe anyone else coming out of the house in the neighborhood. Nobody in the neighborhood. He was there around 9 a.m. So this is about 6 hours after everything happened. He took 6 blood samples from the snow, and he found he didn't have any of the proper evidentiary evidence collecting equipment with him. So he said that he found some temporary evidence containers to use, and he took the snow with the blood in it back to the station. Now this is so crazy. Today was so crazy that we've never done this in a review before, but we have to today show you video clips. Here's the video clip of him explaining on direct examination how he collected the evidence. We'll let you hear it from his own lips.
Blood samples, because they were frozen, we debated on how to collect it. We didn't think swabbing was going to be easy to do if it was frozen. So we decided on finding some type of temporary plastic evidence container. We were able to find large cups, and we took 6 samples. We bagged the 6 samples, and Sergeant Lank transported them back to Canton Police Headquarters. Blood samples.
All right, so you heard him there. He said they found temporary evidence containers, 6 large cups. They bagged them and took them back to the station. That isn't anywhere near the whole story, but you've got to wait until cross-examination to get the whole story on that. So it sounds pretty innocuous so far. He found 6 large cups, put the snow in, take it back to the station. Lank checks it in evidence. Well, then later on in his testimony, it shows a video of some officers removing the tail light from the SUV. And again, he continued to narrate what was happening in the video. And the judge again told him to stop talking unless he's being asked a question. Doesn't want to hear the narration. Then the prosecutor kept asking for questions that were calling for speculation. The judge was getting upset, and she called everyone to a sidebar, and that essentially ended his direct examination. Then the cross-examination started. And as always, the cross-examination of the prosecution's witnesses was brutal. It was absolutely brutal. Let's see what happened. Well, this is essentially 2 years after the accident, and he had never been interviewed by anyone relating to this matter until last month. At the time of the accident, at the time of this incident, He never wrote a report about his involvement in the case. He never took notes. He doesn't know anything about the body. He doesn't know the height of the body. He wouldn't believe the defense lawyer. He wouldn't believe anything the defense lawyer said, but he was very, very willing to believe the prosecutor. Again, this was so weird. We have to hear it from his own mouth. Let's hear him talk about this.
In fact, you never saw John O'Keefe's body, did you?
That's correct.
Okay, so you were giving them information that you had about which you had no personal knowledge, correct?
I had knowledge from other offices. I did not see John O'Keefe at the scene. He was transported to the hospital. That is correct. Yes.
Right. So you couldn't determine exactly how he was positioned, right?
Not precisely.
From head to toe, right?
Not precisely.
Where his arms or his hands were.
That is correct. Yes.
He's a 6'2" man, correct?
I don't know.
You don't even know that?
I don't know his size. No.
If I told you that he's over 6 feet tall, would you have any quarrel with that?
If Mr. Lally told me, I would take it as fact.
Fair enough. For purposes of my question, you don't want to take my word for it, but in fact, you never saw John.
Did you hear that? Let's close that window. Listen to that. He doesn't know a thing about the body, where it was, how it was positioned. He doesn't believe the size. And then he said, would you accept he's over 6'2"? And he said, if the prosecutor said it, I would accept it as fact. But he doesn't want to accept it as fact if the defense lawyer says it. That is ridiculous. That is completely insane for him to say something stupid like that. And you saw that he got laughed at. They weren't laughing with him. They were laughing at him for that response. To just write out there in court and say that everything the prosecutor said should be taken as fact and nothing the defense lawyer says should be taken as truth. That is ridiculous, and that really upset me. But moving along from that, he continued to explain that even though he didn't have any notes or anything, he didn't diagram where he found the blood. He didn't diagram where he found this cocktail glass. No measurements were taken at all. Don't know how far from anything happened. In his own words, everything was an estimate or a guess. That is such damning information. This is the guy who's doing. It's unbelievable, the state of this investigation and how he got involved in this. He was home, and then he came out, and then at this point he had to go to the police station. He was at home, then he had to go to the police station to get cold weather gear. Then he went to the site, but he also called the lieutenant in charge of detectives, Mr. Keller. And he told Mr. Keller, the lieutenant in charge of detectives, that he was going to the scene. Where does Lieutenant Keller live? Conveniently, Lieutenant in charge of detectives Keller, who our witness here, Mr. Gallagher, informed that was going to attend the scene. Lieutenant in charge of detectives Keller lives right across the street from Brian Albert's home, right across the street from where the body was. He reiterated that in 30 plus years, he has never, not once, processed a crime scene in the snow. Now, he knew whose house it was. He testified that he didn't remember who told him where the body was. Strangely, he had an evidence scene tent in his trunk. He apparently, when he was interviewed a month ago about this, there's some discrepancies to what happened. The report of that interview said that he went to the station to get a tent. But he challenged that and said, no, I never said that during my interview with this other detective. So he's essentially calling one of the detectives who gave him this interview a liar, or misremembering perhaps is the more diplomatic way of putting it. But let's listen to this in his own words.
Read it to yourself.
Yes. Okay.
This is him reading the report.
Yes.
May I approach?
Yes.
Now they're going to ask him about the report.
Do you recall telling Foley?
You can ask him if that refreshes his recollection.
Does that refresh your recollection at this point?
It doesn't change my recollection.
You said you didn't recollect exactly what you told Lieutenant Tully about the tent. And I'm asking, does that refresh your recollection about what you told Lieutenant Tully about the tent?
Yeah, that's not what I said about the tent.
Okay, so you didn't say, I drove to Canton PD headquarters to retrieve a tent to protect the area where O'Keefe was found from falling snow, but never used the tent due to high winds.
We didn't have a tent at that time.
That wasn't my question. I'm being very specific. Did you say that to Lieutenant Tully?
No, that was misinterpreted.
Okay, so if he got that, if that's in his report, that's incorrect.
It's not accurate, correct?
Okay.
It was misinterpreted. It was inaccurate, which means one of them is lying. I have this tent in my trunk, and I had to go from my home to the police station to get a tent to protect it. Those are not things that you can mishear. You can't say one thing and hear the other, no matter how hard you try. One of them is not being honest. Well, there was no footprints other than around the body. And again, this is all on cross-examination here. Surprisingly, he had never used a leaf blower to preserve a crime scene before. And doesn't it make you wonder? He said he used the leaf blower to uncover the layers of blood and then found this broken cocktail glass. Doesn't it make you wonder what evidence he might have blown away? Hair, fiber, other things like that, what may have been blown away from the scene by the leaf blower? Just a little food for thought to consider. Well, let's get back to these temporary evidence containers, shall we? This is crazy. This is really different. You remember he said that he found 6 large cups and took these samples and went back home. Well, we're going to do this in 2 stages. Here's his testimony. Here's the testimony. The temporary evidence containers were red Solo cups. Yeah, the red plastic with the red on the outside and the white inside, just the regular old-fashioned run-of-the-mill, get them at any store in the universe, red Solo cups. And where did he find these red Solo cups to use as temporary evidence containers? Well, from none other than the lieutenant who lived across the street from where the body was found and Brian's home. Yeah, they went across the street to the lieutenant and they got some red Solo cups from him to contain the evidence and take it back to the station. Now, the scene is only about 1 mile from the police station, but he couldn't be bothered to go back to the police station to get actual real evidence collecting stuff. He said he didn't swab the blood on the snow because he didn't think it would be effective. So instead of trying to use actual real evidence swabs to attempt to swab the blood from the snow, he thought it would be better to use non-sterile, unsealed Solo cups. That was a better option for him. Well, he did admit that it's not standard practice to use Solo cups to collect evidence. But then he said something. He said nothing was standard about this scene. It's a dead guy in the snow. That's about as standard a scene as as you can probably get. But he said, no, nothing was standard about this scene. He didn't take note or mention where he collected these blood samples, which blood samples were in which of these open red Solo cups. He never found the missing shoe while he was shoeing around with the leaf blower. They never found any tailgate material while he was blowing around the scene with a leaf blower, and he testified that they got down to the green grass. But still, didn't see any of the 45 pieces of tail light material that was eventually found over the few weeks after this incident occurred. He didn't search the house. He didn't seek a warrant from a judge to search the house. He didn't ask permission to search the house of the officer. He didn't ask even at all to search the house. Well, then he went back to the scene about 3 hours later, to do interviews with people in the home. But he testifies that he didn't socialize with Brian Albert, the police officer who owns the house. He didn't think it was important to find out who was in the house at the time of the accident. He never asked. He didn't think it was important to know who was in the house, the police officer's house, in which a dead police officer's body was found. He said he didn't want to participate in any investigative interviews, which is why he never asked. Again, let's hear it in his own words.
You said that there were, other than Brian Albert and Jennifer McCabe, there were 3 or 4 other people in the house. Were those 3 or 4 other people in the house at the time that John O'Keefe was found dead or dying on the lawn?
I don't have the answer to that.
Did you think that might have been an important thing to find out?
Again, I didn't think of that at that time, and I didn't think it was important at that time. I knew that Sergeant Lank had already interviewed people in the house.
You had what you knew at that time, Lieutenant, was you had an officer, a Boston police officer, who was either dead or dying on the front lawn of a house with a bunch of occupants, and you didn't think that it was necessary to investigate or interview those occupants yourself?
No, I did not. At that time, I wanted to not participate in investigative interviews.
He didn't even think to ask the people in the house who was there at the time of this incident. He didn't want to. He never even entered his head to ask. Well, now enter another problem. Brian Higgins, an ATF agent. Again, remember, all of this is coming out on cross-examination. It's far different than the information that was given on direct examination, much more in depth. The temporary evidence containers turned out to be open solo cups from the police officer lieutenant across the street. But anyway, I'm digressing. Brian Higgins, ATF agent, apparently had an office inside the Canton Police Department there. He doesn't know if Brian Higgins, the ATF agent, was in the home at the time of the accident or incident. And the ATF agent had a key card to access the station. This is going to be key later on to some other testimony that's given. Now, inside the house, he went back and he got in the house about 3 hours later. So around, I guess, noonish. Inside the house, he didn't look for signs of a struggle. He didn't go into the basement. He didn't go into the backyard. He didn't photograph anything, although he had a phone on him with a camera attached to it. He didn't separate any witnesses from each other. And they only did one interview with Jen McCabe, and that was not recorded. No other people in the house were asked anything. Now, you may also recall that the SUV, Karen's SUV, was taken to the police station, and it sat there for 3 days in the Sallyport, essentially the garage of the police station. It sat in the Sallyport for 3 days. Dozens of, this is what he's testifying to. He testified under cross-examination that dozens of officers had access to the vehicle during that 3-day period. Unfettered access. The vehicle was not photographed immediately upon arrival in the Sallyport. In other words, they didn't pull it in and take pictures of exactly the condition the SUV was in when it arrived. So there's no way to tell if anything was changed in the SUV or with the SUV, because nobody took the pictures. Now there are pictures from the police station that show the evidence bag where the 6 solo cups of evidentiary blood were placed and carried into the station. This is an interesting thing as I can't make this up. I'm utterly speechless. Let's look at this. Let's look at this evidence bag. This evidence bag where the 6 solo cups of blood evidence were placed and carried to the station. This is it, people, right here. It is a Stop and Shop grocery store paper bag.
I do not know.
Next photograph, please.
And 2 things. Not only is this not a sterile and forensically stable evidence collection bag, it's also placed on the ground in the sally port of the police station, about 2 feet away from the SUV, from Karen Reed's SUV. We're going to talk about that in a second, but just look at how this blood evidence was carried into court. I mean, into the police station. Inside this, it's open solo cups inside of a Stop and Shop paper grocery bag. Evidence of a police officer's murder, they're alleging. That's how they handle evidence of supposed murder of a police officer at their station. Look at that.
Taking a look at what's been marked as evidence item 39, you recognize what's in the middle of the photograph.
Yes,
What is that?
those are the plastic cups with the coagulated blood.
Do you see on the top of the photograph, same rag
I do.
Oh yeah, there's a
Same
dirty rag
lines.
there or something too.
Yes.
that appear that those unsealed cups with liquid blood in them are situated right near the right rear quarter panel of the SUV in this photograph?
They are to the rear of the vehicle. Yes.
And next item, please.
Can you imagine? So yeah, these non-sterile, open solo cups, and he has no idea how many people have handled these solo cups before evidence was put in them, all the way back from the manufacturing to the packaging to getting to the lieutenant across the street's house to getting to him, passed around the other officers. He has no idea how many people have touched these plastic solo cups. Then he puts these 6 plastic solo cups of blood evidence in the investigation of the murder of one of their own police officers into an open paper shopping bag from Stop and Shop. There's clearly nothing sterile or forensically stable about any of this. And he has no idea where that shopping bag came from. That's his testimony. He doesn't know where that shopping bag came from that they put the evidence in. And again, he admits that it's right next to the SUV. He admits that having an open, unsealed container holding evidence only a few feet from the defendant's SUV is a, quote, recipe for cross-contamination. Well, then it was time for a redirect by the prosecution. Nothing much happened. Nothing much happened on redirect. The next witness was a dispatch officer, Sean Good. Sean Good was on the stand for a while. Now, you may remember ATF agent Higgins, who had the office at the station. Well, our good officer, Sean Good, the dispatch officer, says that the ATF agent Higgins came to the station around 1:30 a.m., but didn't say anything to him. He just wandered around, I guess. And the first call to 911 was made by Carrie Roberts, saying a woman couldn't find her husband who didn't come home last night. Then, I guess about around an hour-ish after that, about 6:04 a.m., another 911 call was made by Jennifer McCabe. And that's when Officer Good left his position at the dispatch and went to the scene of the crime, or the scene of the incident, we'll call it. Now when he was there, he couldn't overhear any conversations, he said, that were not directed at you. In other words, you couldn't overhear conversations going on around you because it was loud. The storm was loud and Karen Reed was loud. And it was a bit of a chaotic scene. You know, he said that she didn't know how her boyfriend ended up there. And Karen was threatening to take her own life on the phone to her father. He noted that the lights weren't on at the Alberts house when he arrived. When he got there, the Alberts house was dark. He testified that he's worked with Kevin Albert, Brian's brother, for 18 years. And when he was asked what the people in the house looked like when he knocked on the door at whatever time it was in the morning, he looked like they had just woken up. Now, on cross-examination, things went a little worse for our erstwhile Sean Good. He said he grew up in Canton. He went to school with Courtney Proctor. He knew Courtney Proctor well. Courtney Proctor is the state detective, the state police detective, Michael Proctor, the one who, as we were told during opening statements by the defense, allegedly took the SUV 90 minutes before he reported taking it on the search and seizure report. He also allegedly broke or entered or somehow got into Karen Reed's cell phone without a warrant and was texting his high school buddies that he was looking for nude photos of her and was disappointed that he didn't find any. That Michael Proctor, his sister, went to school and was in the same grade as Sean Good, the witness. Now, he was also in the same grade as Joe Daniels, the sister-in-law of Christopher Albert, who is Brian Albert's brother. And Christopher, we come to find out, is a town selectman. I assume that's sort of like a town councilman. And he works with Kevin Albert. So just to summarize there, he works with Kevin Albert. Christopher Albert, who is a town selectman, his sister-in-law is Joe Daniels, who went to school with the officer. And he also was in the same grade as Detective Michael Proctor's sister. Now, at this point, the witness starts getting a little cocky and smirky. You know, he's mugging at the defense lawyer. He was asked if he would help Kevin Albert in a crisis. He said, "Of course, we're police officers." And he said, "Well, what about, would you help Kevin Albert in a crisis outside of work?" And he responded, "I don't know what you're asking." And at this point, he starts answering questions by just going, "Sure. Sure, sure." And this smug, whatever you say type of voice. Like, "Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure." And then be like, sure. Just being very dismissive and smug and icky, I guess. Icky, that's a legal term of art. Now, he was asked if he was the primary investigator in the reconstruction analysis of the case. He said, "No, I have no idea what you're talking about. I was not the primary investigator in the reconstruction analysis of this case." Well, then he was shown a state police report. It's a report that was prepared by the state police saying that he was assigned on this case as the primary investigator in the reconstruction analysis of this case. Then he said that the Canton police do not do homicide investigations. They just don't. Their department doesn't do homicide investigations. Then the questioning went back to ATF agent Higgins again. He's also known ATF Higgins for about 5 to 10 years. And this entire time he's continuing to answer questions, sure. And he was handling the dispatch on that night, so he has to stay in the dispatch room. If something unusual happens, then he'll leave. Now, he saw Higgins enter the station around 1:30 a.m. He didn't know why ATF agent Higgins was there, but he said that it was not unusual for ATF agent Higgins to come into the station at 1:30 a.m. on a weekend. I'm calling BS on that. I have no direct evidence or grounds for saying BS. I'm just saying a government agent is not just going to be mulling around a police station at 1:30 a.m. on a weekend. That doesn't sound reasonable at all to me. But anyway, as the cross-examination of Sean Good continues, he emphasizes that location is important. You have to get proper location. And if you recall, way earlier on, there was the discussion that the police report was incorrect. I believe it was the first witness other than the state's family that the first question asked by the defense was, is everything in the dispatch report wrong? And the answer was yes. Well, this is the guy that was responsible for writing that, apparently. You remember that even one of the things that was wrong was the house, the address of the house. Brian Albert's house was incorrectly reported in the police report, in the dispatch report. He lives at 32, and the police report says he lives at 34, and the police report said 32 as the location for the house. Well, when asked about that, he said, I did not write the wrong address on the dispatch log. He said, no, I wrote 34. I didn't write 32. I didn't write it incorrectly. Well, let's see how that line of questioning went for him, shall we? It didn't go as well as he had hoped.
Getting back to the location, which you said was important, what is the location listed in your very police report?
On the face sheet, it says 32, but in my narrative is 34.
Okay. The face sheet is important, is it not?
Yes.
People see the face sheet before they get to the narrative, correct?
Sure.
Is accuracy important?
Yes.
And the very first thing that's entered with regard to the location is inaccurate, right?
Say it again.
The very first entry with regard to the location on your police report on the face sheet is inaccurate. Would you agree with that?
I guess so, yes.
So yeah, I did not write it wrong. I did not write the incorrect address. He's like, well, look on the first page. Well, the first page says 32, but the body of the report says 34. And I like the question, well, aren't they going to look at the first page before they look at the next pages? And he got him to admit that, yes, the very first time in his own police report, contrary to what he had just testified to, was wrong. He says he called another dispatcher over to cover the desk so that he could go to the location, even though it isn't really his job to go to the location. And while he was on his way, or when he was going to the location, he called two other off-duty cops to respond to the location with him. And then he and Sergeant Lank entered the house together when they got there. He said he didn't know where the cellar door to the door to the basement was. He never went down to investigate. He didn't see if there was a struggle down there. He didn't see if anything was trashed down there. He just didn't do anything. And now eventually, he says there were 5 police vehicles on the scene. 3 had lights on. 2 ambulances were there, but not at the same time. Fire truck was there. It had its lights on. And nobody came out of the house during all of this. When there's at least 5 vehicles with red and blue flashing lights. They said that they were trying to talk over the noise of the storm and Karen screaming. And all of these flashing lights are in front of his house. And Brian Albert personally never came out of his house. Brian Albert didn't come out of the house for the entire 90 minutes that Sean Good was there. Then he went back to the station. And finally, at this point in the cross-examination, the judge got after him for giving those smug, sure answers and told him to answer yes or no. Then he testified that he told Kevin what he saw and observed on the day of the incident, but he doesn't remember how long after this was he talked to Kevin. He doesn't remember who was there. Now, he also testified that he would be on the lookout and on high alert for any evidence or listening for any statements about what had occurred as part of his investigation. He knew the area to be searched. He knew where the body was. He knew it had to be searched carefully and thoroughly. He testified that he didn't want to miss anything. He didn't see officers using their hands to check through the snow, but he did see some of the police officers using their feet to clear snow. He also testified that the search was thorough enough that they recovered drops of blood. But during this detailed, intensive, very careful, very thorough search, they didn't find any of the 45 pieces of taillight that were found. They didn't, we specifically asked him, how many pieces of taillight did you find? None was the answer. They didn't find a hat. They didn't find the missing shoe. And when he was asked about the crime scene log, which is the log of who enters and exits crime scenes, he said he had never heard of a crime scene log before. When he was asked if he remembered about the crime scene log from his training at the police academy, he said no, he doesn't remember that. They didn't use any heaters to melt the snow. They didn't post an officer to prevent anyone from entering the crime scene. The crime scene became open to the public. Anybody could walk in, out, and around and through the crime scene where a police officer had potentially been murdered only 2 hours later. Only 2 hours after all of this was it open to the public. Interestingly enough, on the dispatch police report, everybody's first and last name was spelled out completely, except for one person in the police report. Turns out that this police report, where everybody that was involved's first and last name were entirely spelled out, one of them, Brian Albert's name, was for some reason not spelled out completely in the report. Now, they made this mention of all of the people involved, but interestingly enough, the report doesn't mention that Kevin's son, Colin Albert, was present at the scene. Colin Albert, who was not only Kevin's son, but Brian's nephew, he was on the scene, but not mentioned anywhere in the report of who was on the scene. Everyone's home address is listed. In this report, everybody's home address is listed except for one person. Interestingly enough, ATF agent Higgins, his address was listed as the police station, not his home address. It was the police station's address was listed, and he doesn't know why. And then at that point, suddenly the jury was sent out, and he never came back, and there's no explanation why. But what happened next was really fascinating. The voir dire, as we say in Utah, the voir dire, as foo-foo, people that pretend to know Latin to pronounce it. It's voir dire, damn it, because that's how we pronounce it in Utah. They voir dired Sergeant Lank. And what that means is the defense wants to bring up some really, really uncomfortable stuff about Sergeant Lank when they question him on the stand. Well, let's see what it is that the defense wanted to bring in about Sergeant Lank, who was the one that was who interviewed McCabe and was there on the scene and was went into the house eventually with Sean Good. Well, Michael Lank takes the stand. He knows all the Alberts. He's known another brother, Tim Albert, since they were children. He's known all the Albert brothers since they were kids. He hasn't socialized with Chris Albert in a while. He's civil with Brian. He wouldn't describe Chris as a drinking buddy, but he did drink with him years ago. Now, they go back to 2002. So 22 years ago. He denies being in a particular restaurant or bar in 2002 with Chris Albert. He was there, but he was not with Chris. And he realized that Chris was involved in a fight in the parking lot. Chris Albert was involved in this fight. Chris approached his vehicle. He was off duty. He was in his own vehicle. Chris approached him and said that he'd been in an altercation with the La Polito brothers. Now, I don't know if you're involved, if you live in that area of the country, in the Massachusetts area, the Massachusetts, New Jersey, kind of that area, and you get in a fight with the Lapalito brothers, and one of them is named Alfredo Lapalito, and they're brothers, and they hang around. Yeah. I'm not saying, but I'm thinking. The Lapalito brothers. He said he'd been in an altercation with the Lapalito brothers, and that threats had been made against him. And he was talking to Officer Lank, asking what to do, how should I handle this? And while they were talking to him, a group of guys started walking towards Chris. And Chris said, "Oh no, here they come." Well, Lank testifies that he told the owner of the place to call the police. And then eventually he got Alfred Lapalito in handcuffs. And then at that point, Officer Lank gets in a fist fight with Mark Lapalito. Now, Lank says that Lapalito hit him first. Well, do we believe that? Do we believe that Mark Lapalito hit Lank first? Well, I don't know. Let's look at Lapalito's side of the story, shall we? Lapalito said that Lank punched him in the face first, took him down, continued to hit him, and eventually bit him hard enough to draw blood. Then, after that was over, he stood up and spit in his handcuffed brother's face. You decide which one you want to believe, but before you make a final decision, you should know that the Lapalitos sued Sergeant Lank in federal court, and he settled. He settled this federal lawsuit filed against him by the Lapalito brothers. Now, there's a criminal case against the Lapalito brothers as well. Initially, no police report was filed. They let Alfredo go, and apparently Mark Lapalito ran off from the scene. And he was asked this by the defense lawyer. In what realm of reality would someone who has assaulted a police officer just be allowed to run off, and you would release his brother? But anyway, no report was filed initially, but soon after the event, the Lapalito brothers came to the station to file a complaint against Sergeant Lank. Then Lank filed a report about the incident. He filed this report after the Lapalito brothers came to the station to file a report against him. Now, eventually the brothers were charged. And between the time they were charged and the time that they went to trial for this assault on a police officer, I'm assuming is what it was, or whatever. They didn't specify exactly what the charges were. But between the time they were arrested and charged and the time of the trial, apparently they ran into Sergeant Lank at a service station, at a gas station. And allegedly, the Lapalito brothers asked, "How you doing?" And, "Oh, I'm sorry." Allegedly, according to the Lapalito brothers and others, the officer said, "How you doing?" to the Lapalito brothers. And one of the Lapalito brothers said, "Not so good. You attacked me. Now I had to defend myself in court." And for some reason, then he arrested them for witness intimidation. Yeah, he arrested them there on the spot for witness intimidation. So how did this? They've got the main criminal charge against them, and they've got this witness intimidation hanging over their head. How did this get resolved? Well, they were found not guilty of the assault, and the district attorney threw out the witness intimidation charges because they were without merit. So not guilty on assaulting a police officer, and the witness intimidation charges were just chucked out by the district attorney and never got to trial. Now, Lank denied that all of this happened because he was helping the Alberts. Because that was actually, did all of this happen because you would help out the Alberts? You'd do anything for the Alberts? No. He said, "I would have conducted myself in exactly the same way for any ordinary citizen." I'm calling bullshit on that. Well, it was time for the prosecution to question Sergeant Lank here as part of the voir dire to see whether this previous act gets brought into evidence. Well, he said that Good had they said, well, didn't you and Sergeant Good also have to arrest Tim Albert in 2012? Implying that, well, you're not favorable to the Alberts because you actually had to investigate and charge Tim Albert in 2012. And he testified that he's civil with Brian, but they've had disagreements in the past. Now, then it's time for the defense lawyer to follow up his questions. He gets into this big deal where, okay, you're not supposed to be biased because you had to investigate and charge Tim Albert in 2012. Well, in that case, Tim Albert crashed into a woman in a parked car in broad daylight and then fled to Brian Albert's house where he was allegedly living at that time. So he said he hits a woman in a parked car and flees the scene and goes to Brian Albert's house. Isn't it true that you had no choice but to arrest him under those circumstances? His reply and only defense to that was, well, he didn't crash into a woman in a parked car in broad daylight. The car was stopped at a red light, not parked. That was his explanation. Well, when they eventually got to Brian's house and Tim was there, they didn't give him any sobriety tests. They didn't give him any, field sobriety tests. They didn't give him any blood tests. They didn't give him any breathalyzer test. Tim Albert explained, I panicked. And he was charged with a misdemeanor, given a divergence program, and his record was wiped clean. But, he has nothing to do with, doing things for the Albert family because he doesn't do that apparently. And then the defense lawyer argued that this incident from 2012 should be admitted because it shows that there could be some bias or prejudice by the police officer, particularly Sergeant Lank, in favor of the Alberts. And he said that the fact that this happened 22 years ago doesn't make it less relevant. He said it makes it more relevant because it shows the length of time they have covered up and helped out the Albert family. They've been helping him out for 22 years. So the jury is entitled to hear the evidence and determine how much weight to give it. And he said he should have recused himself from the investigation at the beginning because of his closeness to the Alberts, but he didn't. And he wants to call, like the judge says, how are we going to lay the foundation for this prior act? He said he wants to call one of the Lapolito brothers to lay the foundation. Wouldn't that be awesome if he calls one of the Lapolito brothers to the stand to lay the foundation for this absolute evisceration of Sergeant Lank that would happen on the stand? But the judge said she wants to see the Lapolito report before she makes any decisions today. Day 6. Now, the prosecutor, of course, argued that it's old and it's irrelevant and it would confuse the jury and it has nothing to do with this case. Well, the judge said, I disagree that it has nothing to do with this case. She said it's going to come in some form. She just has to decide what that form will be. So we are, in some way, going to hear about this 2002 incident when they attack the credibility of Sergeant Lank when he gives his testimony. Hopefully we'll hear more about that today, but holy cow, that is a big, big development. I told you this was going to be long. Usually these summaries are 10, 15 minutes long. This is nearly 50 minutes. There was so much that went on in court. This was day 5 of this Karen Reed murder trial. Make sure you watch day 6. That'll be here as well, and we'll be doing that live.